The sleek private jet touched down at exactly 2:48 in the morning. The runway lights reflected off its polished exterior as it glided to a stop. Inside, Thomas opened his eyes, momentarily confused about where he was. The flight from Tokyo had been long, and he'd fallen asleep somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. "We've arrived, sir," his pilot announced through the intercom. "Your car is waiting." Thomas rubbed his eyes and gathered his things. At 42, he had the kind of wealth most people only dreamed about. His tech company had revolutionized how people shopped online, and the business trip to Japan had secured yet another deal worth billions. But success had its price. Tonight, it was the bone-deep exhaustion that made even standing feel like a chore. "Thank you, Richard," he said to his driver as he slid into the back seat of the waiting black car. "Home, please." The city lights blurred past the window as they drove. At this hour, even New York seemed quiet. Thomas loosened his tie and checked his phone. 17 unread emails, 42 text messages, and a calendar reminder about tomorrow's board meeting. He sighed and put the phone away. It could all wait until morning. The car pulled up to his building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that pierced the night sky. The doorman tipped his hat as Thomas entered. "Good evening, Mr. Palmer, or should I say good morning?" Thomas managed a tired smile. "Morning, I guess, though I haven't been to bed yet." The elevator whisked him up to the penthouse on the 60th floor. Thomas yawned as he fished his keys from his pocket. All he wanted was a shower in his bed. The meetings had been exhausting, the negotiations tense, and the 14-hour time difference wasn't helping. He turned the key in the lock as quietly as possible. A habit from his childhood when coming home late meant trying not to wake his mother after her night shift. The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. Thomas stepped inside and was about to flip on the lights when a figure emerged from the shadows of his kitchen. He froze, heart suddenly hammering in his chest. "Mr. Palmer," a voice whispered urgently. He relaxed slightly when he recognized his housekeeper, Lynn, but then tension returned. Why was she here at 3 a.m.? She never stayed this late. Lynn put a finger to her lips, her eyes wide with something that looked like worry. "Please, sir, you must be quiet," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thomas frowned. This was his home. Why was his housekeeper telling him to be quiet? A flash of irritation cut through his exhaustion. "Lynn, what are you doing here at this hour?" he asked, keeping his voice low despite his confusion. "Is something wrong?" Lynn glanced nervously toward the hallway that led to his home office. Now Thomas was fully alert, his tiredness forgotten. Something was definitely not right. Before Lynn could answer, he heard it, a faint electronic beep. The sound was unmistakable to him. It was the confirmation tone of his biometric safe being accessed. "Someone's in my office," he whispered, reaching for his phone to call security. Lynn gently placed her hand on his wrist, stopping him. Her touch was light but determined. In the 5 years she had worked for him, she had never done anything like this before. "Sir, please listen," she said softly. "It's not what you think." Thomas stared at her. Lynn had always been the model of professionalism, thorough, discreet, and respectful of boundaries. She kept his massive apartment spotless, managed the other household staff, and never pried into his business. That's why her behavior now was so alarming. "Explain," he said, his voice clipped. Lynn took a deep breath. "The person in your office is Ms. Rivera." Thomas's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Camila Rivera was the former head of cybersecurity at his company, brilliant, outspoken, and stubborn. 6 months ago, he had fired her after a heated argument about the security of their new shopping platform. She had warned him about serious flaws that could expose millions of customers' data, but the board was pushing for a quick launch, and fixing the issues would have delayed things by months. "You let my fired employee into my home? Into my office?" Thomas hissed, a mixture of disbelief and anger washing over him. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Lynn didn't flinch. Her calm demeanor in the face of his anger only confused him more. "Sir, she came to me with proof. The security flaws she warned about. They're worse than anyone knew. Your new platform launches in 3 days, and if it goes live as planned, the personal information of every customer will be vulnerable." Lynn's voice was steady, her eyes never leaving his. "I've worked for you for 5 years. I wouldn't have done this if I didn't believe it was important." Thomas ran a hand through his dark hair, trying to process what was happening. Lynn had always been an excellent judge of character. She had warned him about business partners who later tried to cheat him, and had an uncanny sense for people's true intentions. If she believed Camilla enough to risk her job, then maybe there was something to it. Why break in? He demanded. Why not just email me the proof? Would you have read it? Lynn asked simply. The question hit Thomas like a slap. He thought about the hundreds of unread emails in his inbox, many automatically filtered into folders he rarely checked. Would he have seen an urgent message from the woman he'd fired in a public argument? Probably not. Another electronic beep came from the office, followed by the sound of typing. What exactly is she doing in there? Thomas asked. Gathering evidence, Lynn replied. She found a way to prove the vulnerabilities without actually stealing any real customer data. She's creating a demonstration to show you exactly how the breach would work. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. If Lynn was right, millions of people could have their credit card information, addresses, and personal details exposed. The fallout would be catastrophic, not just for his business, but for the people who trusted his company with their information. He thought about the board meeting tomorrow where they would finalize the launch plans. Everything was set. Marketing had already begun the countdown campaign. Retailers were ready. Stopping now would cost millions, possibly billions. Why do you care so much about this, Lynn? Thomas asked, genuinely curious. She had never shown much interest in the technical side of his business before. Lynn's expression softened slightly. 8 years ago, before I came to work for you, my family lost everything in a data breach. My parents' identities were stolen. They were immigrants who had worked their whole lives to save enough to buy a small house. It was all gone in a day. She paused, her eyes distant with the memory. The company knew about the security problems beforehand. They just decided that fixing them wasn't worth delaying their product launch. Thomas felt something twist in his chest. In all the years Lynn had worked for him, she had never shared anything so personal. He looked at her now, really looked at her, and saw not just his efficient housekeeper but a woman with her own history of pain and loss. He glanced toward the hallway where his office door was partially open, a sliver of blue light spilling out. The smart thing would be to call security, have Camilla arrested for breaking and entering. The safe contained valuable intellectual property, company secrets worth billions, but something in Lynn's steady gaze made him hesitate. Show me, he said finally. Lynn nodded once, relief visible in her eyes. Thank you, sir. As they moved silently toward the office, Thomas felt a strange shift happening inside him. For years he had seen his employees as assets or liabilities, his customers as data points, his success measured in market share and quarterly profits. It had been a long time since he'd thought about the actual people whose lives could be affected by his decisions. The light from multiple computer screens cast Camilla's face in a blue glow as she worked, unaware of their presence at the door. Her fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, lines of code reflecting in her glasses. She looked exactly as she had 6 months ago when she'd stood in his office, passionate and frustrated, trying to make him understand the risks he was taking with other people's data. He had dismissed her concerns then. Tonight, in his own home with Lynn standing beside him, Thomas wasn't sure he could do that again. Thomas stood in the doorway of his office, watching Camilla work. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision, completely unaware of his presence. The blue light from the monitors cast shadows across her focused face. For a moment, he simply observed, a mixture of anger and curiosity keeping him silent. Camilla was dressed in dark clothes, her curly hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Multiple screens displayed what looked like customer databases and security protocols, his company's private information. The sight of someone else accessing his systems made his jaw clench. Lynn stood quietly beside him, hands clasped in front of her. The tension in the air was thick enough to touch. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. Camilla jumped, nearly knocking over her chair as she spun around. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "You're early," she said, recovering quickly. "I expected you tomorrow morning." "In my experience, most people don't schedule their break-ins around the homeowner's arrival," Thomas replied coldly. "But please, don't let me interrupt your felony." Camilla didn't flinch. "If I wanted to steal from you, I could have done it remotely without ever setting foot in this apartment." She gestured to the screens. "I needed you to see this in person. No filters, no corporate lawyers watering it down." Thomas stepped further into the room, eyes narrowing as he took in the displays. His safe was open, but nothing seemed to be missing. "How did you get in here?" he demanded. "That safe has biometric locks," Camilla almost smiled. "The same way anyone with determination could break into your new shopping platform, by finding the weak points in a system everyone thinks is secure." She turned to one of the screens. "But that's not important right now. What matters is what I found." Thomas looked at Lynn, who remained by the door, then back to Camilla. "You have exactly 3 minutes to explain why I shouldn't call the police." Camilla nodded and turned back to the main screen. "Your new shopping platform uses something called a universal sign-in feature, right? One account that works across all your services?" "Yes," Thomas said cautiously. "It's our main selling point. Customers can use their existing account to shop anywhere on our network of partner sites." "And that's exactly the problem," Camilla replied, pulling up a diagram that showed the data flow between systems. "The connection points between these services have critical security gaps. I warned you about this 6 months ago, but I didn't have enough proof then." She clicked through several screens of code. "Now I do." Thomas moved closer, studying the displays. He wasn't a programmer, but he understood enough to follow along. "What am I looking at?" "This is a simulation I built that mirrors your platform architecture," Camilla explained. "Watch what happens when I run this test attack." She pressed a key and the screen filled with a cascade of data. Usernames, addresses, credit card numbers, purchase histories, all flowing out through what should have been secure channels. "This isn't real customer data," Camilla said quickly, seeing the alarm on his face. "It's all simulated. But this exact attack will work on your live system if you launch on Thursday." Thomas watched, his stomach tightening as the implications became clear. Millions of customers, their personal information exposed. The damage would be catastrophic, not just to his company, but to the people who trusted them with their data. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "Total compromise," Camilla replied. "Names, addresses, payment information, shopping habits, connected accounts." She paused. "Even the security questions people use to reset their passwords on other sites." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. The board meeting was in less than 8 hours. The launch publicity was already running. Stopping now would cost millions. His investors would be furious. "Why did you do this?" he asked, looking at Camilla. "Breaking into my home, my safe. You could go to prison." "Because you wouldn't listen any other way," she said simply. "I tried the proper channels. I wrote reports. I raised concerns in meetings. I even came to you directly." Her voice held no accusation, just a statement of fact. "You had me escorted out of the building." Thomas remembered that day. Camilla standing in his office, passionate and frustrated, warning him about the risks. He'd dismissed her as being overly cautious, more interested in perfect security than practical business needs. The board was pushing for a quick launch, he said, hearing the weakness in his own defense. "And you chose them over the safety of your customers," Camilla finished for him. The bluntness of her statement hung in the air between them. Thomas turned to Lynn, who had been silent throughout the exchange. "And you? Why get involved in this?" Lynn stepped forward, her usual calm slightly shaken. "Ms. Rivera came to me last week. She explained what could happen if the platform launched as planned." She hesitated. "I've seen firsthand what these kinds of breaches do to regular people. I couldn't stand by and let it happen again, not when there was a chance to stop it." Thomas looked back and forth between the two women. One, his former employee who had risked her freedom to make him see the truth. The other, his housekeeper of 5 years who had risked her job to help. Both seemed more concerned about strangers' data than their own personal consequences. The silence stretched as Thomas processed everything. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, the first hints of dawn touched the skyline. The city was waking up, millions of people starting their day, many of them his customers. "Show me everything," he finally said, pulling up a chair. Camilla nodded, relief visible on her face. "The biggest issue is here," she said, pointing to a section of code. "The authentication system that connects your shopping platform to your partner sites." For the next hour, she walked him through the vulnerabilities one by one. Thomas asked questions, his initial anger giving way to growing concern as the full picture became clear. This wasn't just a minor security issue, it was a fundamental flaw in the system's design. "Why didn't our security team catch this?" he asked, more to himself than to her. "Some of them probably did," Camilla answered anyway. But after what happened to me, who would risk their job to bring it up? The implication stung. Had he created a company culture where raising concerns was seen as career suicide? Where problems were buried rather than addressed? Lynn had quietly left and returned with a tray of coffee. She set it down on the desk, the familiar routine somehow grounding in the midst of this unexpected night. "Thank you," Thomas said, really looking at her. In 5 years, had he ever properly thanked her for anything? Lynn nodded and stepped back but didn't leave the room. There was a quiet determination in her stance that was new to him. "What would it take to fix this?" Thomas asked, turning back to Camilla. "Honestly, a complete redesign of the connection protocols," she replied. "At least 2 months of development and testing." Thomas winced. 2 months meant missing the holiday shopping season, the main reason for the rushed timeline. "The board would revolt, and if we launch anyway?" Camilla's expression hardened. "Then I go public with what I know. I didn't want to. That's why I'm here instead of talking to tech journalists. But I won't let millions of people have their data stolen because your board wants a better quarterly report." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Thomas believed her. He stood up and walked to the window, watching as the sun rose over the city. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. On one side, his board, his investors, the market expectations that had been driving his every move for years. On the other, the customers who trusted his company with their personal information. When had the balance shifted so completely toward the former at the expense of the latter? "I built this company to make online shopping easier and safer," he said quietly. "Somewhere along the way I forgot about the safer part." He turned back to face Camilla and Lynn. "If I delay the launch to fix these issues, I'll need proof to show the board." "They won't take my word for it," Camilla nodded. "I've documented everything. The vulnerabilities, the potential impact, and the recommended fixes." She reached into her bag and pulled out a hard drive. "It's all here. No copies, nothing stored in the cloud." Thomas took the drive, turning it over in his hand. Such a small thing to cause such a large problem. "Why did you really come back?" he asked. "After the way things ended, you could have just let the platform crash and burn. Some people would say we deserved it." Camilla was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Because I still believe in what this company could be," she said finally. "And because the people who would be hurt by a breach aren't the board members or the executives. They're regular people just trying to live their lives." Her words hit home in a way nothing else had that night. Thomas thought about the customers he so rarely considered as actual people. The parent buying school supplies, the student ordering textbooks, the elderly person purchasing medications. He turned to Lynn. "You risked your job tonight." Lynn met his gaze steadily. "Some things are more important than a job, sir." In that moment, Thomas felt something shift inside him. For years, he had surrounded himself with people who told him what he wanted to hear, who prioritized profits and growth above all else. Here were 2 women willing to risk everything to do what they believed was right. "I have a board meeting in a few hours," he said. "I need to prepare." Camilla began gathering her equipment, clearly assuming she was being dismissed. Lynn moved toward the door, her expression carefully neutral. "Wait," Thomas said, stopping them both. "I need your help. Both of you." They looked at him with surprise. "The board won't want to hear this, especially not from me. They'll say I've lost my nerve or that I'm overreacting." He looked at Camilla. "But they might listen to the security expert who was willing to risk prison to sound the alarm. You want me to come to the board meeting?" Camilla asked incredulously. "Yes." Thomas turned to Lynn. "And I need you to tell your story. About what happened to your family. The board needs to hear the human cost of these breaches, not just the technical details." Lynn hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of sharing her painful past with a room full of executives. "You don't have to," Thomas added quickly. "I've already asked too much of both of you, but I think it might make a difference." The 3 of them stood in silence as the morning light filled the room, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the city was fully awake now, traffic noise filtering up even to this height. Somewhere in those streets were millions of people going about their days, unaware of how their digital lives hung in the balance. "Okay," Camilla said finally. "I'll come, but I won't sugarcoat anything." "I wouldn't expect you to," Thomas replied. He looked at Lynn questioningly. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I will share my story if it will help." Thomas felt a wave of gratitude. Thank you. Both of you. He checked his watch. 3 hours until the board meeting that would now go very differently than planned. 3 hours to prepare for a battle he never expected to fight. Against his own board. For the sake of customers, he had too often reduced to data points. We should get ready, he said. As they left the office together, Thomas realized something strange. Despite the stress and the looming confrontation, he felt more alive than he had in years, more connected to the actual purpose of his work than all the successful business deals and profitable quarters. It had taken his housekeeper asking him to be quiet in his own home to finally make him listen. The boardroom fell silent as Thomas finished speaking. 12 pairs of eyes stared at him, expressions ranging from shock to outright hostility. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the tense scene. "Let me get this straight," said Victor, the head of the board and Thomas's longest-standing investor. "You want to delay the launch by 2 months because your fired employee broke into your home last night?" His voice dripped with disbelief. Thomas had expected this reaction. He stood at the head of the table, Camilla and Lynn flanking him on either side. Neither woman looked comfortable in the sleek corporate environment, but both stood tall. "I want to delay the launch because our platform has critical security flaws that put our customers at risk," Thomas corrected calmly. "Camilla has provided proof that I've shared with all of you." "Technical mumbo-jumbo that most of us can't even understand," huffed Patricia, another board member. She was in her 60s, old-school business through and through.
"And now you've brought your housekeeper to a confidential board meeting?"
"This is highly irregular, Thomas." Lynn didn't flinch under Patricia's dismissive gaze. She stood quietly, hands clasped in front of her, the picture of dignity despite being clearly out of her element. "Lynn is here because she has first-hand experience with what happens when companies ignore security warnings," Thomas replied. "And Camilla is here to answer any technical questions you might have about the vulnerabilities she discovered." Victor leaned forward, his expression hardening. "We've invested millions in this launch. The marketing campaign is already running. Our retail partners have built their holiday strategies around our timeline." He pointed an accusing finger at Camilla. "And we're supposed to throw all that away because she says so?" "Not because she says so," Thomas replied. "Because the evidence says so." He nodded to Camilla, who stepped forward and opened her laptop. The large screen on the wall lit up with the same demonstration she had shown Thomas in his office just hours earlier. "This simulation shows exactly how the current system can be breached," she explained, her voice steady despite the hostile room. "Watch what happens when I run this test attack." For the next 15 minutes, Camilla walked the board through the vulnerabilities in detail. She showed how a relatively simple attack could extract massive amounts of customer data, how the connections between services created dangerous security gaps, and how the current system prioritized convenience over protection. Some board members leaned in, genuinely trying to understand. Others sat back with arms crossed, their expressions fixed in stubborn disbelief. When Camilla finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "Even if what you're showing us is accurate," said James, the youngest board member, "these kinds of breaches happen to companies all the time. They issue an apology, offer some free credit monitoring, and life goes on." He shrugged. "It's practically a cost of doing business these days." Thomas felt a flash of shame at how familiar that logic sounded. It was exactly how he might have thought just 24 hours ago. "Perhaps Lynn can help us understand why that approach is unacceptable," Thomas said, gesturing for her to step forward. Lynn took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, the only visible sign of her nervousness. 8 years ago, my parents had their identities stolen through a data breach at a company much like this one," she began, her accent more pronounced under stress. "They were immigrants who worked for 30 years cleaning office buildings at night. They saved every penny to buy a small house and put my brother through college." The board members shifted uncomfortably as Lynn continued. "When the breach happened, the thieves took everything. Their savings, their good credit, even their identity documents. The bank foreclosed on their home while they were still fighting to prove they hadn't taken out the loans that appeared in their names." Lynn's voice remained steady, but her eyes held old pain. "My father had a heart attack from the stress. He survived, but he was never the same. My mother still works night shifts at 72 years old because they lost their retirement." She looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes one by one. The company knew about the security problems beforehand. Their own experts warned them, But fixing it would have delayed a product launch, and they decided that was too expensive. The room was absolutely silent now. Several board members couldn't meet Lynn's gaze. "You all see numbers on a screen," she continued. "Percentages and projections. I see my mother's hands cracked and swollen from cleaning toilets for extra shifts to make up for what was stolen. I see my father's face when he realized they had lost the home he worked his whole life to own." Lynn straightened her shoulders. "So when you talk about data breaches as a cost of doing business, I wonder, whose cost? Not yours. You will still go home to your nice houses. Your bank accounts will still be full." Thomas watched his board members' faces as Lynn spoke. Some showed genuine discomfort. Others remained stoic, but none interrupted her. "Thank you, Lynn," Thomas said softly when she finished. He turned back to the board. "This is the reality behind the numbers. These are the actual costs of our decisions." Victor cleared his throat. "While that story is certainly moving," he said, choosing his words carefully, "we have a responsibility to our shareholders. Delaying the launch will cost tens of millions in lost revenue. Our stock price will take a hit. We could face class action lawsuits from our retail partners. And if we launch with these vulnerabilities and there's a breach," Thomas countered, "what will those lawsuits look like? What will happen to our stock price then? To our reputation? That's speculative," Patricia cut in. "The breach might never happen." Camilla snorted, drawing glares from several board members. "Something funny, Ms. Rivera?" Patricia asked coldly. "Yes, actually," Camilla replied. "The idea that it's speculative. I literally just demonstrated exactly how the breach would work. It's not a question of if, it's when. You'll forgive us if we're skeptical of someone who broke into our CEO's home," James said. "That doesn't exactly scream trustworthy source." Thomas felt the meeting slipping away. The board was retreating into defensive postures, finding reasons to dismiss the warning rather than address it. He needed to change tactics. "Let me be clear about something," he said, his voice suddenly harder. "I'm not actually asking for permission to delay the launch." The board members looked up in surprise. "As CEO, I have the authority to make this call on my own," Thomas continued. "I brought this to the board out of respect and transparency, but my decision is made. We are delaying the launch until these security issues are fixed properly." Victor's face reddened. "You can't do that unilaterally." The board can fire me if they disagree," Thomas interrupted. "That's your right. But I will not put millions of customers at risk to meet an arbitrary deadline." The tension in the room thickened. Several board members exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. "You're betting your career on this," Patricia said, sounding almost impressed despite herself. "Yes," Thomas agreed simply, "because it's the right thing to do." Victor stood up abruptly. "I think we need to discuss this matter privately. Thomas, would you and your guests please step outside?" Thomas nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He led Camilla and Lynn out of the boardroom and into the hallway. As the door closed behind them, he let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Well, that went about as well as a root canal," Camilla muttered. Thomas couldn't help but laugh. "Actually, it went better than I expected." Lynn looked concerned. "They may fire you." "They might," Thomas agreed. "But I meant what I said in there. This is the right decision, regardless of what it costs me personally." The three of them moved to a small seating area near the windows, overlooking the busy street below. For a few minutes they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "I never thanked you," Thomas said suddenly, looking at Camilla. "6 months ago you tried to warn me and I didn't listen. If you hadn't taken such a drastic step, we would have launched that platform and exposed millions of people to exactly what happened to Lynn's family." Camilla shrugged, but he could see she was pleased by the acknowledgement. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it needed to be done." "Why did you stay in tech after what happened to your family?" Thomas asked Lynn. "I would have thought you'd want nothing to do with the industry." Lynn considered the question. "I stayed because running away doesn't fix problems, and because I believed that not all tech companies would make the same choices." She gave him a small smile. "Today I think I was right to believe that." Before Thomas could respond, the boardroom door opened. Victor stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "We'd like you to come back in," he said stiffly. Thomas exchanged glances with Camilla and Lynn before they all stood and returned to the boardroom. The atmosphere had changed. There was less open hostility, but the tension remained. We've discussed your position, Victor began once they were seated. While we don't appreciate the way this information was brought to us, we cannot ignore the potential liability. Thomas felt a surge of hope. This wasn't the fire the CEO language he had been half expecting. However, Victor continued, a 2-month delay is unacceptable. Our competitors will eat us alive. The security fixes can't be rushed, Camilla interjected. Cutting corners is what created this problem in the first place. Victor gave her a cold look, which is why we're proposing a compromise. We announce a limited beta launch on the original date, invitation only, cap number of users, clear disclosure that it's a test phase. This keeps our promises to partners and investors while giving your team time to fix the security issues before the full public launch. Thomas considered the proposal. It wasn't perfect, but it was workable. A controlled beta would limit any potential damage while maintaining their market position. Who would be in this beta group? He asked. Voluntary sign-ups only, Victor replied, with explicit warnings about the test nature of the platform. Thomas looked at Camilla, raising an eyebrow in silent question. She thought for a moment. It could work if, and this is a big if, we're completely transparent about the state of the platform. No hiding behind vague terms of service. Real clear warnings. And the security team needs complete autonomy to implement fixes without interference from marketing or sales, Thomas added. Several board members frowned at this, but Victor nodded reluctantly. Agreed, but we expect regular progress reports and a firm timeline for the full launch. Thomas extended his hand. We have a deal. As handshakes were exchanged around the table, Thomas noticed Lynn watching with quiet satisfaction. This outcome might not be everything they had hoped for, but it was a victory nonetheless, a moment when profit hadn't automatically trumped people. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, with action items assigned and follow-up meetings scheduled. As the board members filed out, several nodded respectfully to Lynn, a small acknowledgement that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. When only the 3 of them remained in the boardroom, Thomas turned to his unlikely allies. Thank you both, he said simply. This wouldn't have happened without you, Camilla smirked. Does this mean I'm rehired? Thomas laughed. I think we can arrange that. In fact, I'm thinking of creating a new position, Chief Security Advocate. Someone whose entire job is to ensure customer protection is never sacrificed for business convenience. Sounds perfect for me, Camilla said, her expression turning serious. I accept. Thomas turned to Lynn. And I owe you the biggest apology. You risked everything to help make this right. Lynn shook her head. No apology needed. I'm just glad I was there when you came home late. The 3 of them walked together toward the elevator. A strange new bond formed through the events of the past 12 hours. As they stepped inside and the doors closed, Thomas realized something had fundamentally changed, not just in his company's plans, but in himself. For years, he had built walls between different parts of his life. Business decisions were separate from personal ethics. Company interests were distinct from customer welfare. His home was isolated from his work. Last night, when those walls came down, when his housekeeper let his fired employee into his private safe to expose his company's flaws, something better had emerged from the collision. As they rode down to the lobby in comfortable silence, Thomas wondered what other artificial boundaries might need breaking in the days to come. The sunset painted the kitchen in warm oranges and deep purples as Thomas opened a bottle of wine. It had been 14 hours since the board meeting, and exhaustion pulled at his shoulders. Across the counter, Camilla sat reviewing security protocols on her laptop, while Lynn prepared a simple meal. The unlikely trio had spent the day working through the implications of the morning's decision. The beta announcement goes live tomorrow, Thomas said, filling 3 glasses. PR has crafted something that's honest about the security updates without sending everyone into a panic. Camilla looked up from her screen. The development team is already mapping out the fixes. Some of them are actually excited about the challenge. She accepted the wine with a nod of thanks, though I think a few of them are just happy someone finally listened to their concerns. Thomas winced slightly at the implied criticism. How many warning signs had he missed? Because he'd created a culture where raising problems was seen as being negative. Lynn set a plate of simple but beautifully arranged food in front of each of them. Despite the long day, she had insisted on cooking, saying it helped her think. You don't have to do this, Thomas had told her. You're not on duty. I know, she'd replied with a small smile. That's why I'm doing it. Now, as they sat around the kitchen island that had probably never seen such a gathering before, Thomas found himself marveling at how quickly life could change course. 24 hours ago, he'd been on a private jet returning from Tokyo, focused entirely on the launch, oblivious to the security flaws that could have harmed millions of people. To unlikely alliances, he said, raising his glass. They clinked glasses, the simple ritual somehow cementing their strange new partnership. The stock dropped 8% when the delay was announced, Thomas said after taking a sip. Victor called me 4 times to complain. Did you answer? Camilla asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. The 4th time, Thomas admitted. He was slightly calmer by then. Lynn, who had been quiet, finally spoke. Was it worth it? What this might cost you? The question hung in the air. Thomas considered it carefully. Yes, he said finally, though I'll be honest, I'm not sure I would have said that yesterday. What changed? Lynn asked, her gaze steady. Thomas thought about it. I've spent years building walls between different parts of my life. Business decisions were separate from personal ethics. The company's interests were distinct from our customers' welfare. He gestured around them. My home was isolated from my work. He took another sip of wine. When those walls came down, when you let Camilla into my home to expose the company's flaws, something better emerged from the collision. Camilla raised an eyebrow. Poetic, but practically speaking, what happens now? We fix the security issues, launch the platform properly, and then what? Everything goes back to business as usual? It was a fair question. Companies often made grand promises during crises, only to revert to old habits once the danger passed. No, Thomas said firmly, this isn't a temporary correction. The new chief security advocate position we discussed, that's just the beginning. I'm thinking about creating a customer protection council with actual power to veto features that put users at risk. Camilla looked skeptical. And the board agreed to this? Not yet, Thomas admitted. That's the next battle. Lynn, who had been listening carefully, spoke up. The most important change has already happened. When they both looked at her questioningly, she continued, You stopped seeing numbers and started seeing people. Her simple observation struck Thomas deeply. She was right. For years, he had viewed customers as data points, employees as assets or liabilities, success measured purely in market share and quarterly profits. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of the actual human beings behind those abstractions. How did you become so wise, Lynn? He asked with genuine curiosity. She smiled slightly. When you clean someone's home, you learn who they really are, not who they pretend to be in public. I've worked for many wealthy people over the years. Some see only themselves. The best ones see others. She looked at him directly. You were somewhere in between. Until now, Thomas felt both exposed and understood. In 5 years, Lynn had observed him more clearly than he had observed himself. The real test will be what happens when this isn't fresh anymore, Camilla said, bringing them back to practical concerns. 3 months from now, 6 months from now, when there's pressure to launch something new and exciting. Will customer protection still matter then? It was the essential question. Thomas had made a decision in a moment of clarity, but would it stick when business pressures mounted again? That's why we need to institutionalize these changes, he said. Build them into the company's structure, not just its current priorities. Camilla nodded slowly. It's a start. They fell into a comfortable silence, eating the simple but delicious food Lynn had prepared. Outside, the last light faded from the sky, the city lights coming alive in a constellation of human activity. Tell me something, Thomas said after a while, looking at Camilla. That night 6 months ago after I fired you, did you already know you would do this? Break into my home, force me to see the security flaws? Camilla considered the question. No, I spent the first month looking for another job, trying to put it behind me. She set down her fork. But then I started hearing rumors about the launch timeline, about features being prioritized over security. I knew what was going to happen and I couldn't let it. You risked prison, Thomas observed. Camilla shrugged. Some things are worth the risk, he turned to Lynn. And you? Why help her? Why risk your job? Lynn was quiet for a moment. When Ms. Rivera came to me, she didn't just talk about code and systems. She talked about people who would be hurt. She glanced down at her hands, strong, capable hands that had worked hard all her life. I thought about my parents, about how different their lives might have been if someone had been brave enough to stop that other company from making the same mistake. Thomas felt a wave of shame at how little he knew about Lynn, despite her having worked in his home for 5 years. I never asked about your family before. I should have. Most employers don't, Lynn said simply without accusation. I'd like to hear more, Thomas said, if you're willing to share. And so, as the night deepened around them, Lynn told them about her childhood in a small apartment where her parents returned bone-tired each night from cleaning office buildings. She told them about her father's quiet pride in becoming a U.S. citizen, about her mother's dream of owning a small house with a garden, about her brother who became the first in their family to attend college. She spoke of the devastating impact of the data breach, how the system that was supposed to protect consumers had failed her family, how the company had offered meaningless apologies while lives were destroyed, how her father's health had never recovered from the stress. That's why I became a housekeeper for wealthy people, she concluded. I wanted to understand how the other half thinks. What makes someone decide that their profit is more important than other people's safety? And what did you learn? Camilla asked softly. Lynn looked thoughtful. That most people don't set out to cause harm. They just stop seeing the connection between their decisions and the people affected by them. She glanced at Thomas. The distance makes it easier. Thomas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It was easy to prioritize profits when you never saw the faces of those who paid the price for your decisions. We need to close that distance, he said, almost to himself. Then with more certainty. That's what the Customer Protection Council should do. Make sure we never forget the real people behind the numbers. Camilla leaned forward, suddenly energized. We could include actual customers on the council. Not just executives and engineers, but regular users who can speak to how our decisions affect them. And employees from all levels of the company, Thomas added. People who see different parts of the process. As they built on the idea, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The pure excitement of building something meaningful, not just profitable. It reminded him of why he'd started the company in the first place, before quarterly targets and investor demands had narrowed his vision. The conversation flowed late into the night. They moved from the kitchen to the more comfortable living room, where Lynn surprised them by accepting a second glass of wine and kicking off her sensible shoes. Camilla propped her feet on the coffee table, something Thomas would have found annoying yesterday but now struck him as refreshingly human. Around midnight, the talk turned more philosophical. Do you think companies can really change? Camilla asked, staring into her glass. Or do they inevitably drift toward whatever makes the most money, regardless of the human cost? It was the question that had been lurking beneath their entire discussion. Whether this moment of clarity could last or would fade with time. I think they can change, Lynn said with unexpected conviction. Because companies aren't buildings or legal documents. They're collections of people making choices every day. Thomas nodded slowly. The trick is aligning those choices toward something more meaningful than just profit. Easy to say, Camilla pointed out. Harder to do when shareholders are breathing down your neck about quarterly results. True, Thomas admitted. But what if we expanded our definition of success? What if protecting customer data and privacy became metrics we reported on with the same prominence as revenue and growth? The idea took root as they discussed how to implement it, creating transparency reports, establishing customer trust indexes, measuring security and privacy outcomes with the same rigor as financial outcomes. We'd need to educate investors, Thomas said. Help them see that these aren't just ethical concerns, they're business concerns. Data breaches destroy value. Customer trust builds it. As the conversation continued, Thomas found himself seeing his company and his role in it in a completely new light. For years, he had defined success in narrow terms: market dominance, revenue growth, beating competitors. But what if success could be more holistic? What if his company could be known not just for its innovative platform, but for its unwavering commitment to protecting the people who used it? The night deepened around them, the city outside growing quieter. They were no longer CEO, employee, and housekeeper, just three people trying to solve a problem together, each bringing different perspectives and experiences to the table. Around 2 a.m, Lynn finally stood up. It's late and you both have an important day tomorrow. Thomas realized with a start that she had stayed hours beyond what could reasonably be expected, engaging in a conversation that had nothing to do with her official duties. "Lynn," he said, suddenly awkward, "I don't expect. That is, you don't have to." She smiled, understanding his discomfort. "I chose to be here tonight, Mr. Palmer, just as I chose to help Ms. Rivera yesterday. Some conversations are worth staying up for." After Lynn left, Camilla gathered her things, preparing to head to her own apartment. "You know," she said at the door, "when I broke into your place last night, I expected to either end up in jail or, best case, force you to delay the launch. I never expected," and she gestured vaguely. "Whatever this is." Thomas laughed softly. "That makes two of us." After she left, Thomas stood alone in his spacious penthouse. It felt different somehow, less like a showcase of his success and more like a place where something important had happened, where walls had come down and something new had begun to grow in their place. He walked to the window and looked out at the sleeping city, at the millions of people whose data his company held, whose trust he had nearly betrayed through neglect, whose protection would now become his priority. "Some conversations are worth staying up for," he repeated to himself, finding unexpected wisdom in Lynn's simple statement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, skeptical board members, nervous investors, practical obstacles to implementing their ideas. But tonight had shown that unlikely allies could emerge from unexpected places, and that sometimes it took a housekeeper asking a billionaire to be quiet to make him finally listen. 3 months later, the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel buzzed with excitement. Tech journalists, industry analysts, and company partners filled the room, their attention focused on the stage. Large screens displayed the company, logo above the words, "Security First Launch." Camera flashes sparkled throughout the crowd as Thomas stepped up to the microphone. He looked different than he had 3 months ago, more relaxed despite the high-pressure moment. His suit was the same premium quality, but his smile seemed more genuine, reaching his eyes in a way it rarely had before. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. 3 months ago, we made an unusual announcement. We delayed our platform launch because we discovered security vulnerabilities that could have put our customers at risk. Thomas paused, surveying the audience. Many of you wrote stories questioning that decision. Some analysts downgraded our stock. Our competitors rushed to fill what they saw as a market opening. A ripple of acknowledgement moved through the crowd. The delay had indeed been big news in the tech world, with plenty of speculation about the company's future. Today, I'm proud to announce that our shopping platform is launching with what we believe is the most robust security architecture in the industry. But this event isn't just about a product launch. It's about a new direction. He gestured to the side of the stage where Camilla waited. "I'd like to introduce Camilla Rivera, our chief security advocate." Camilla walked confidently to join him, dressed in a sharp blazer over a t-shirt that read, "People over Profits." A few audience members chuckled at the bold statement. 3 months ago, Thomas continued, Camilla risked everything to make sure we didn't launch a platform that could harm our customers. Today, her job is to keep challenging us to ensure we never prioritize convenience or profit over people's security. Camilla stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you, Thomas. When I was fired from this company 6 months ago for raising security concerns, I never imagined I'd be standing here today." She smiled at the murmurs this revelation caused in the audience. But sometimes the right person just needs to listen. For the next 20 minutes, Camilla explained the security architecture of the new platform. She didn't dumb it down or hide behind technical jargon. She spoke clearly about what had been fixed and how the system now protected customer data at every level.